the Path of Sages, and Non-Buddhist Teachings. In the rest of Chapter 6, Shinran treats two other types of teachings that differ from the true Pure Land way. Buddhist teachings other than the Pure Land, namely the Path of Sages, and non-Buddhist teachings, chiefly petitionary or divinatory forms of belief and worship prevalent in Japan in Shinran's day, and indeed not uncommon in the contemporary world. Concerning the Path of Sages, Shinran states elsewhere, quote, "The Path of Sages comprises teachings which people who have already attained Buddhahood preach in order to encourage us," close quote. And he labels these provisional ways. Since the essential gate based on the Contemplation Sutra represents the directing of the various practices of the Path of Sages toward birth in the Pure Land, it seems consistent with his view of provisional means that he should broaden it to embrace the entire Path of Sages. In the chapter on transformed Buddha bodies and lands, however, his perspective is informed rather by the concept of the last Dharma age, the view of present human existence as lacking the capabilities for correctly putting the teachings of the Path of Sages into practice and achieving enlightenment. It is not to be taken as an excuse for laxity. A genuine apprehension of the last Dharma age rests not upon a merely intellectual grasp, but upon probing self-reflection, which is also the force that moves us through the provisional phases of the Pure Land way. Part 2 of the chapter on transformed Buddha bodies and lands comprises an admonition against, quote, "wrong, false, and misleading opinions of non-Buddhist teachings," close quote. Except for a brief introduction, it is composed wholly of quotations, a number of which are extensive. From the absence of the careful editing and arrangement that we find in the earlier chapters, it appears that Shinran felt little need to inform the material with his own perspective. The principal concerns are spirit worship, astrology, and other forms of divination and religious Taoism. Perhaps the most important target for criticism in this section is the worship of spirits of the dead and gods, a practice found throughout Japan's history. Shinran's quotations express a rejection of non-Buddhist forms of worship. Quote, "If one has taken refuge in the Buddha, one must not further take refuge in various gods," close quote. This rejection is based on a denial of any necessity for worship or attention, either because the benevolent or protecting gods and higher influences should in fact be understood to serve the Buddhas, or because an anxious belief in malevolent forces is a form of delusion and should be overcome by following the true path. A number of the quotations in the latter part of Chapter 6, including the final quotation of Part 1 and some in Part 2, are drawn from basic texts of the Tendai school, works that appear nowhere else in teaching, practice, and realization. It has therefore been conjectured that this section represents texts that Shinran became familiar with during his years of practice on Mount High, and that he selected and copied in his youth. Their relevance remained, however, because they continued to reflect the religious atmosphere of the age.